And next up, we are going to have Kaitlin Beegle from the Filecoin Foundation. She does protocol governance at the Filecoin Foundation. And her talk is going to be on crowdsourcing the Codebase, an intro to protocol governance in Web3. And we'll invite Kaitlin up to the stage.
Cool. Thanks, Kwame. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yeah, everything is great. I'll
Awesome.
drop off.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. Great. All right. So again, hi, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much to our hosts at ChainSafe for inviting us to talk and bringing us all together. My name is Kaitlin, and I'm at the Filecoin Foundation. If you're unfamiliar, Filecoin is the native incentivization layer for IPFS, and it's the goal of the Filecoin Foundation to make Filecoin not only a building block of the Web3 ecosystem, but also one of the best ways to resiliently store data across the world in a way that is open, trustless, and decentralized for some of humanity's most important information. So at the foundation, as Kwame said, I am a technical PM for governance, and it's my responsibility to bring together everyone in our ecosystem to achieve the goals and innovation standards that we've set for ourselves in the coming years. So the purpose of this talk is to provide a high-level introduction to what governance actually is in protocol ecosystems, and to also help you identify it more easily so that you can use it to your advantage as a builder, whether you're coming to Web3 for the first time, you're a veteran software developer who's looking to engage with new projects, or you're just trying to learn, see who's out there, and perhaps meet some folks doing interesting work. So, cool. So what is governance? This is one of those things that's extremely challenging to define, in part because it sounds very intuitive, right? Sounds like government is kind of like the processes for how we make decisions in open source environments. And this is certainly true. But governance is deceptively complex. And when we fail to recognize the complexity in these systems, it's how we sort of make mistakes in understanding how an ecosystem or a community actually functions. So the best way that I like to describe governance to people who are trying to engage with it for the first time is to ask them to think about what home means to them, okay? So your home could be where you live now. It could be your parents' house or perhaps where you grew up, but it's the place where you feel most comfortable. And if you were to describe this place to me, it would probably take a lot of time and you would give a lot of details, right? So you would describe what kind of home it is, if it's an apartment or a house, where it is geographically in the world, who else lives there with you, how it's organized, what the furniture looks like, what the wallpaper looks like. But you would also describe what your routine is, what you talk about, and why it is that this place feels special to you, right? Your home is a combination of physical things, but it's also about a culture and an environment that you have worked to build. And for me, the exact same thing is true of crypto governance, right? All of these different components that go into making a house feel like a place where you belong are the exact same environmental, cultural, and material elements that transform a group of people on a Discord server into a focused crypto community that is capable of building really, really cool projects, okay? And I think it's important, although this definition or explanation is a little conceptual, it's really important to adopt this high-level understanding of governance, because very frequently folks only understand governance in the context of ways in which they've interacted with it directly. And oftentimes these are very limited experiences. So we know how rapidly changing the Web3 landscape is. Many people come into Web3 through a variety of different pathways. Some, if you're native developers, React developers, JavaScript developers, you've been in this space for a while. You may already be engaged in really complex protocol projects. Other folks are developers in Web2 who are coming in for the first time through NFT communities or DAOs. And all of these different types of groups and ways of experiencing Web3 tend to have different needs as it relates to governance, right? As a result, and I see this all the time in Filecoin with new developers and community members who are looking to get engaged, people think that governance is sort of one thing, or it exists in a binary. You either have governance or you don't. You either, have a voting token or you don't have governance at all, right? Governance is either good or it's bad, okay? But it's really important to note that there is no one element of a community or one tool, right, that makes up governance. None of these things in this list, including governance tokens and voting mechanisms, are singularly sufficient or required for actually having governance. Governance is a process that is unique to every single community, and it is always a complex mix, even if it is exacted through specific tools like governance voting. So that being said, how do you go about actually understanding how governance works if it's different everywhere? Well, there's a couple of key questions that I always ask when I get involved in a new project, and which I think do a really good job of framing governance for community participants, okay? So asking, who is in our community? What are we trying to do? What resources do we have? What values do we hold? And how complex are our goals? To me, these are the 5 things that really define how governance structures itself around a group of people and defines materially how governance is going to operate in an ecosystem, okay? It's really important, again, to reiterate the fact that a lot of different groups have different governance standards. And for me, one of the most important of these questions in understanding why something works one way in an ecosystem and some way completely different for another project space is this question at the bottom about complexity, right? How complex are our goals, right? If anyone has ever worked in AI or is more familiar, they may be very well acquainted with the idea that as we increase system complexity, it becomes increasingly difficult to automate the work that we're doing. This is absolutely true in crypto governance as well. And it's why you tend to see projects, spaces, DAOs and DeFi applications specifically, tend to have more automated governance features that are a little bit more explicit and easier to engage with. Whereas lower layer implementations, layer 1 and layer 2 blockchains tend to have more human-driven structures and organizations. And these can be a little bit more implicit and difficult to recognize right away, okay? Additionally, however, these questions are not always very well articulated in different groups, especially, if you're joining a group of folks who just taught themselves Solidity and want to get a project going. They probably have not thought about governance or really fleshed out their standards. Different crypto projects have varying levels of development when it comes to crypto, even if they've been around for governance, even if they've been around for a while. So aside from understanding why governance may exist in a certain ecosystem in the way that it does, these questions can also help you understand and identify governance more implicitly, even when it isn't made very, very clear to you, right? So if you're thinking about submitting a proposal to a team, you're looking for funding, you want to get involved and understand what's a priority for a group of people that you're working with for the very first time, those things may not be told to you very explicitly, but asking yourself these foundational governance questions can help you orient yourself to understanding what is expected and where opportunity space actually lies for you as a builder. So to that end, when I meet new builders who are trying to get involved in Filecoin for the first time, oftentimes they end up in my Slack DMs or in one of our working group channels, because they're very interested in the technology and they have a lot of great skills. They've gone through the spec document, but they don't know where to go next. My recommendation for folks, especially in those lower layer protocols, which have very human-focused governance processes, is to start with governance, right? This is the space where we lay out all of our innovation priorities, all of the projects we're currently working on, and all of the community proposals that we've funded in the past. This is the space where you have a lot of long-term project veterans who are engaged very consistently and over a prolonged period of time, who you can work with if you're looking for mentors for a very specific skill set or in a very particular application area. It's also an opportunity for you to engage in a very specific and focused way. If you come in and dive directly into the Filecoin protocol specs, it's over 200 pages at the moment. And it is very difficult to really make heads or tails of what's going on in our ecosystem at the moment if you're just looking at some of our technical documentation. Through governance, however, you can see exactly what we are working on currently, where our needs are, and what opportunities and gray spaces still exists. And it's a great way to learn about components of complex blockchain systems in a very focused way. Of course, the specs will always be there for your reference, But again, when we have people who are really trying to learn and dive in for the first time, our improvement proposals, which is a core component of our governance process, is almost always where I direct them. And in order to understand that space a little bit more, again, remember, more complex protocol ecosystems tend to have more human-centered governance. It's very hard to implement governance tokens or on-chain voting when things that you have to decide, the people you need to organize, and the resources you have to allocate don't very easily fit into the yes-no binary, right? So the way we tend to envision it, and this is true at Filecoin, this is true at the Ethereum Foundation, this is also true at Polkadot, Polygon, lots of similar layer 1, layer 2 networks, is that we think about the way that Web 2 to Web 3 has changed the role that the product plays, okay? And the role that project developers play in actually contributing to a finished product, okay? So in Web 2, if you have your traditional tech companies where they may have market research, sales information, user feedback, user testing, et cetera, all of these variables that can inform their decision-making, they ultimately do hold authority in terms of deciding what features to prioritize, what they want to build, and what they ultimately want to ship to consumers, right? It is a much more closed off process, even if it's highly complicated. And what we seek to do is not to necessarily lower that complexity, but to provide the same level of organization and collaboration in an open source environment. So what we think of governance as being in something like Filecoin or at Ethereum, et cetera, is a community of nodes within a system organized around the product, which for us is the Filecoin network, right? And creating networks and linkages between these different contributors, these different community members and community groups, in order to create deliberation about what is important, what we want to build, and how we're going to build it, okay? For us, it's less about the point of decision-making and more about the process of creating really high-quality specs, really high-quality code, and really being able to dedicate ourselves to innovative products and projects that are exciting. So more specifically, right, if you were a developer and you wanted to get involved in these types of processes, one of the things that's really fantastic is that the governance space as it exists in a lot of layer 1 and layer 2 protocols is open and oriented specifically towards builders and providing ways to slot them into new opportunities and project types, okay? So looking at Filecoin as an example of this, if you were to come into the Filecoin ecosystem for the very first time and try and engage with governance, again, there are a ton of different ways that you could do this depending on your own interests and goals, okay? Through all of the channels that we host, you could connect with builders and join working groups. You could go into all of our repos, which are public and fully open, and you can see who's working on what and who's asked really good questions about this thing you don't quite understand. You can connect directly with these people. You can join public meetings. You can get involved in active projects and begin to join team calls. I'm so excited that ChainSafe is holding this. They're one of the Filecoin community partners, and they very frequently join different project scopes across our ecosystem. Whether you are working with a formal organization or just as an independent hobbyist, governance is a fantastic pathway for charting a way into complex protocol spaces, finding ways to learn and deliver value to other people in the community, and also to focus the work that you're doing around certain skill sets or goals that you're interested in developing. And that is it for now. Wanted to leave plenty of space for question and answers and to also just have a conversation about what governance in the space looks like, how you can use it to your advantage, or really talk through any other questions or ideas that you've been wanting to ask about governance since you've been involved in Web3. But thanks again.
Thank you, Kaitlin. That was a great presentation. And we do have some questions, so I'll go through the first one. How is Web3 governance different from shareholder meetings in public firms trading on the stock markets? As in, is it just all formalities?
This is a fantastic question. So we didn't touch on this. This is a whole other can of worms, but there is a space to say whether or not governance in individual communities is good or bad, right? There are shades of gray in how governance is built and executed. And if you're working in a project where you feel like the governance pieces are just formalities, or just ways of checking the decentralization box, it's probably not good governance, right? When we think of the way that we make decisions, there are no sort of formal roles. We do not weight any of our community members in decision making. And again, what we really focus on is not the point at which decisions are made or money is spent on projects, but in the actual kind of idea and innovation space, right? So opening up that innovation process to as many people as possible, really trying to crowdsource all of the information that is coming into and being contributed to a spec or whatever else it is that we're working on and interested in, okay? And so for us, in Filecoin specifically, there are no processes or structures, I think, that would mimic what a shareholder meeting tends to look like. But this is good to point out because you're right that in certain organizations, that is the case. I think it does highlight how complex governance is to build and get right. But I do hope over time that we can begin to create better nuance and just better structures more generally, so that when you join a project, you actually feel like those governance capacities are representative of you as a community member, and that as a community member, you are empowered to engage through governance and also feel empowered to change governance when it's no longer suiting the needs of your organization's broader goals.
Next question. What are the biggest challenges of governance in a diverse set of builders, community members?
Oh my gosh. Well, you've asked one of the right people for this. I've seen a lot of people in Web3 describe their jobs as just being professional cat herders. I very much would say this is true about my work as well. And it's really just the classic problems of coordinating really complex development, right? So you have stakeholder groups that tend to form. Again, there's this complexity question. So in ecosystems, DAOs, community art projects, NFTs, whatever, where like the scope of decision-making is a little bit more binary or a little bit more limited, it's much easier. And you oftentimes have individuals just participating on their own. They want to and they're interested. For protocols, low layer implementations, native blockchains, et cetera, the technology is very complex, the learning curve is very steep, and the tech debt is really high. So what we tend to see is our community members are not usually individuals, but they represent entire companies or organizations that are working as a team within our ecosystem. So you have this like scaling of different people, their influences, where they're spending their time. You also have this incentivization problem, right? We have clients, but we also have storage providers, which is what we call our miners on the network. We do have the Filecoin Foundation, which is pretty agnostic for the most part, but we also have a ton of builder collaborators that we work with, R&D labs, et cetera. We work very closely with protocol labs, and all of these teams are working on different things. Understanding who's doing what, when and where, making sure that those opportunities are clear and transparent for others who'd like to get involved, right? This is an open ecosystem. Anyone can get involved anywhere. And trying to maximize people's talents and interests with the goals and values of our system, very, very challenging task, and one that we deal with in both like macro and micro ways every single day.
Next question. Governance sounds great, but what are some negatives or hurdles with it?
Yeah, cool. I love this question. So one of the things that I really focus on is getting people to think less of governance as something you choose to do, and rather as something that happens whether you plan for it or not, right? So yes, governance has some explicit features. Governance tokens may be on-chain voting mechanisms, what have you. But it also has to do with the culture of your open ecosystem, right? What does your community value and what are they primed to support, okay? A lot of folks think of governance, again, as something that you can kind of turn on or turn off when you have time or capacity, but it's really important to think of it as this more holistic cultural ecosystem that surrounds the work you're doing and can be a pathway to organizing actual development, right? Again, it is super challenging. This is a personal opinion. There's a lot of groups out there that are trying to automate governance and build like very out-of-the-box solutions for governance so teams can kind of plug and play when they want to set up a new project. This is perhaps worthwhile, again, for very simple projects, but it doesn't work for really complex ecosystems because the job there is to coordinate a ton of different factions, groups, peoples, values, all at the same time in order to maximize the quality of what you're building. So I think it's important that people think about governance as this holistic interplay of things. Don't rush into thinking they have to do any one thing to get governance right. You don't have to, again, have a governance token in order to still implement simple processes for aligning people's expectations and work. But do know that, again, it is a huge challenge and it's something that we don't have a really good answer to yet.
Next question. How do you incorporate regulations and standards, example, governmental regulations or jurisdiction, specific rules into governance?
Yeah, this is a great question. I was actually double booked at this time with a meeting with a bunch of lawyers to talk about the same thing. So I don't know, I'm not there. So when we think about governance, kind of in two separate ways. There's community governance, and then there's sort of the legal and compliance information. These things don't always overlap. It really just depends on the web space that you're in. And it's much more common with DeFi, right? So if you're working on a DeFi protocol, you're trying to build liquidity pools or create some kind of like yield farming, like swap interface, you have to think about these things because you hold liability for individual interactions within your community. It's not the same with something like Ethereum or with Filecoin. Again, governance is different in every single ecosystem. But far and away, the way that we think about this is by trying to align our community members around areas where they may be open to compliance requirements or liability, to provide all of like the legal backing for them. But far and away, the focus of our governance activities is really on innovation management. So we very rarely encounter these types of challenges.
Next question. What are some examples of excellence in governance you've seen in the Web3 space?
Yeah, this is a great question. So again, no one has the silver bullet for governance. It's a very much work in progress kind of thing. Ethereum Foundation really set the standard for deliberative governance. All of the Filecoin Foundation process documents are actually based off of the Ethereum improvement proposal process. So we're eternally grateful for the work that they do and that they make available to everyone else. I'm also biased. I really like how Polkadot manages their governance. They break everything down under community and provide governance specific documentation elsewhere. But I think the things that make really, really good governance systems far and away, regardless of what type of ecosystem you're involved in, is one, a community that is active, resourceful, and responsive. Long-term community participants who can act as wayfinders, both technically and sort of socially or culturally. They can tell you what's going on, etc. And a system and a structure that is flexible and seeks to empower community work rather than work as just a series of rules or guideposts. One of the things we talk about constantly is building a governance system that actually supports and pushes forward work that's ongoing, rather than just being sort of a gate that people have to technically cross in order to do the things they want to do. It's really about making this interdependent system that supports the entirety of what Filecoin is trying to achieve. And I think there are other protocols as well that have that similar perspective, and those are the ones, in my perspective, that do governance best. Oh, and as an addendum, Ocean Protocol, their governance is a little bit smaller in scale, but they have fantastic educational resources. I think they're the best available for a specific protocol. And it's important to know that education and access to information is a huge part of good governance as well.
Oh, that was amazing. That is all of our questions. Thank you so much, Kaitlin, for your excellent presentation. It was amazing. I learned so much. And right now we are going to shut down and take a break, and we'll see you guys in a bit.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Kwame.
Thank you again.